I am Dr. Ray Dykes, and this is the Personal Faith Program, a series of podcasts on personal faith with a passion, how to know what you really believe. I remind you that the book is available with workbook pages in it at Parodocs Press, P-A-I-R-O-D-O-C-S Press.com. This podcast is about depression, despair, midlife crisis, the death of the human spirit. Is that a spiritual event? This podcast may have more impact than any other podcast in this series. More adults of 40 plus years will identify with this concept than any other that I've presented. The point of this podcast is to demonstrate the spiritual nature of depression, despair, and midlife crisis. This is a podcast of new straw. Everyone experiences spiritual death sooner or later, except for those people whose physical life is snuffed out suddenly before they encounter this universal phenomenon. Spiritual death can be defined as the experience of despair when one feels the absence of God, confronts one's own mortality in a profound way, and feels that life is meaningless and without purpose. This experience may be brief or may last for years or decades. You may go slowly into the dark night of the soul, or you may fall off the cliff into the bottomless pit. For many, if not most, the experience of spiritual death is directly related to the person's first profound encounter with spiritual death, with physical death. Let me say that again. The experience of spiritual death is directly related for many people to the person's first profound encounter with physical death. This happens when you really, really understand that one of these days you're going to die physically, and you begin to ask serious questions about the meaning and purpose of life and questions about the nature of God. Karen turns 40 and her life is going down the drain. Instead of life begins at 40, it's over. Her identity has been as wife and mother of two. Her husband is now married to his career. The youngest child is almost ready to call her blessed and leave the nest forever. She has lost her identity and her reason for being. It's the death of her human spirit. When Josh was 20 and a senior in college, he was a compulsive moralist. His goal was to be ethically pure. He didn't drink, smoke, or curse. He didn't lie, cheat, or steal. He didn't date, dance with, or even swim with girls for fear of immoral thoughts. One day he discovered he was trying to earn his salvation and he wasn't working. He was miserable. Life was lousy. There was no meaning. He was hurting so much he wished he were dead. He was, spiritually. Josh's spirit died over several years. When the finale came, he felt totally vacated in spirit and void in faith. Josh lost God, hope, and heaven. He felt that he was lying paralyzed on a beach, hands and arms outstretched, facing the sun, waiting to die. During this crucial moment, he considered suicide. The idea of ending it all was a welcome thought. He dismissed this idea because it was too easy and he didn't deserve something this good. Sam is experiencing midlife crisis. He hates his job, so he changes vocation. He hates his wife, so he divorces her and marries a younger woman. He hates the city in which he lives, so he moves to another. He hates himself for all the stupid decisions he's made in his life. He doesn't care anymore whether he lives or dies. Momentary pleasure is the key to his physical life. His human spirit is dead, and there is no more trying. The human race is divided into three categories in this matter of spiritual death and resurrection. First, there is the spiritually innocent who have not yet experienced spiritual death. Now, obviously, the young, the children fall into this category, but circumstances may keep you innocent until you're well up in years. I know people who are 75 years old who are spiritual innocents. There's no time frame on this. Secondly, there are the spiritually dead whose spirit died yesterday or months or years or decades ago and who is beginning the struggle to find new life, or who has resigned from life with no hope of ever knowing a purpose. This is a spiritual zombie. Your heart pumps inside your chest, you breathe in and out, you have a pulse, you go to work almost every day, but your eyes are vacant and your days are empty, and you are at least tempted to mask the pain with an addiction or end it all. What psychologists refer to as midlife crisis is often spiritual death. Third, there is the spiritually resurrecting and spiritually alive segment of the population. You're struggling like mad to break out of the cocoon, or you've broken out as a butterfly, changed forever from the caterpillar. You have a new understanding of life, a new understanding of self, and a new understanding of God. Some people never make it to this stage. Spiritual death is when you decide to quit your job, change vocations, divorce your spouse, and move to a new town, and get a new sports car. You woke up and you looked at yourself in the mirror and you saw a corpse, and you decided this ain't working. You tried to run as hard as you could, and you couldn't get away from it because it was inside you. So you died spiritually. Sometimes you stay dead. The dominant theme of great literature, music, and motion pictures, of all the great classics of all civilizations on this planet during all of recorded history, is spiritual death and spiritual resurrection. The authors, composers, and directors don't use these terms, spiritual death and spiritual resurrection, but that's what they present in their works. Look at the main characters and events of the Bible. Paul of Tarsus was traveling from Jerusalem to Damascus with warrants to arrest Syrian Christians when he had an experience of the risen Jesus. Everything he'd lived for up to that moment came to an end. His old spirit died. Peter of Bethsaida left his wife and children and his fishing business to be chief supporter of his good friend Jesus. He poured his heart into the effort, and it provided him with great meaning for his life. But after Jesus was arrested, he was afraid and told the people at the high priest's house that he had never known Jesus. When the rooster crowed that morning and Jesus was crucified, Peter died spiritually. Jeremiah was scheduled to die physically in the mud in the bottom of a dry cistern in Jerusalem. In the midst of the mud and the muck, he experienced the absence of God, and he died spiritually. Jacob knew Esau was going to kill him beside the brook Jabbok, and he died spiritually. The story in Genesis tells that God told Abraham to take his only son Isaac up on the mountain and slit his throat and burn his young body, and Abraham died spiritually. There are so many stories. You look through the Bible and you'll see pictures of spiritual death. They're everywhere. Each of the world's great major religions deals with this theme in its own way. For example, a Buddhist seeks enlightenment to overcome spiritual death and live in harmony in the world and within the self by learning how to live in the midst of suffering and joy. A Muslim tries to conquer spiritual death by submitting completely to the will of Allah. The enormous impact that Jesus has had on the people of this planet over the course of 2,000 years is due in part to the media coverage given his spiritual death, which happened simultaneously with his physical death. God used the images of Good Friday to make Jesus into God's most profound symbol of the universal reality of spiritual death. In the picture of the crucifixion, there is a face of a person who's confronting his physical mortality, while at the same time expressing his feeling of the absence of hope and purpose and the absence of God. The Greek used in the gospel accounts of the crucifixion says that Jesus yelled at the top of his lungs verses from a psalm entitled, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Today this is called the 22nd Psalm. Clearly, this is a verbal expression of spiritual death by Jesus. He felt that everything he had trusted in before had gone. He felt abandoned by God and overwhelmed by hopelessness. A sense of profound emptiness had seized him in the midst of his physical death in a rock quarry in Jerusalem, his crucifixion at the hands of the Romans. The cross became a symbol not only of Christianity, but also of the universal experience of spiritual death. Can a person experience spiritual death more than once? I've fallen back into the pit a time or two. It's called hell, and it isn't fun. But at least the second and third time you fall in, you have a memory of the first time you got out. The first time you fall in, you don't have any memory of getting out. There is no way out until finally you find it. There's no memory because it hasn't happened before. But that's what makes it so scary. Depression, despair, and midlife crisis are spiritual experiences. The specifics vary with each individual. No one has a right to judge where others are on their spiritual journeys. You may understand yourself as spiritually innocent, never having known the pain of being in the bottomless pit where spiritual zombies live. You may feel worthless, unable even to hope for spiritual resurrection. You may begin to feel the hope of a new life. I believe that God loves people in all three categories equally. Being spiritually alive doesn't put you in a favored position with God, nor is it a position about which you can boast or brag. Does this straw touch your clay? The next podcast will be about spiritual resurrection. See you then.